such an honor to be here introducing the first panel. My name is Rachel Florman, and I'm a master's student at Harvard Divinity School, where I studied Jewish community formation, diaspora identity, and faith-based advocacy. I'm also a co-leader of the student group Jews for Liberation at HDS. And it is such an honor to introduce our speaker, Simone Zimmerman. Based in New York City, Simone is a co-founder of IfNotNow, a board member of JFREJ Action, and on the advisory board of Jewish Currents magazine. Her personal journey is featured in the film Israelism, about a younger generation of American Jews who have been transformed by witnessing the reality in the West Bank and connecting with Palestinians. I'm also very pleased to introduce my professor, Shaul Magid. Shaul teaches modern Judaism at Harvard Divinity School and is a senior fellow at the Center for the Study of World Religions at Harvard. He is the author of many books and essays, including, most recently, The Necessity of Exile, Essays from a Distance. Thank you both so much for being here.
Good morning, everyone. So good to be here with you, and thank you, Jeremy, for that just really moving kickoff for this event. Such an important reminder that the Jewish left in the US is a force to be reckoned with, and that we're growing, and that we're part of actually movements far beyond our community and far beyond this country. Growing up in a tight-knit Jewish community in Los Angeles, I never had to explain why I was a Zionist. It was a fact of my existence, a core pillar of my identity. My maternal grandfather fled from Warsaw, Poland to Palestine in the 30s with his family. They were among the few in their immediate family to escape the Holocaust. My paternal grandfather fought with the Allied forces in World War II and saw firsthand what had been done to his people in Europe. I learned from their stories that the safety and prosperity of my community was something that we had earned for ourselves, in spite of all the world had tried to take from us. I was raised to see Israel's founding, born out of the ashes of the Holocaust, as the ultimate redemptive feat at the end of that century of horrors, after many centuries of horrors. When I was 16, I spent a week walking around Poland, wrapped in an Israeli flag with hundreds of other Jewish teenagers. On the rubble of the crematoria of Auschwitz and Majdanek, we faced east towards Jerusalem, recited the mourner's Kaddish, and said Hatikva. We pledged not to let the deaths of our people be in vain, that we would write the next chapter of Jewish history. I arrived at UC Berkeley's campus 2 years later with a sacred mission: to defend Israel in the war for public opinion on the other battlefront for its safety and legitimacy, the college campus. I was ready, or so I thought, until the campus debates actually started. Student activists were calling on the university to divest from companies that had profited from Israel's war in Gaza in 2009. Israel killed about 1,400 Palestinians in that war, including 300 children. Seeing Palestinian flags, hearing the activist chants, I felt deeply uneasy. I understood calls for Palestinian freedom as a threat to my existence. But there was also something else. Why was the other side debunking my talking points before I could even make them? Glad that resonates. I came to campus intending to teach people the truth about Israel, but instead I had to learn it. When Palestinian students spoke about the terror they experienced at the hands of Israeli soldiers, I felt confused. Soldiers were my friends, my people. To my deeper shock, I then met Jews, including Israelis, who spoke out against Israel's crimes. I honestly couldn't believe they were real Jews. The dissonance between what I believed about Israel and what I was hearing on campus gnawed at me. Returning home that summer, I turned to adults in my community looking for answers. But I was unsatisfied, so I went searching on my own. On a trip to Jerusalem that summer, I found myself in the Palestinian neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. I walked there with a friend from downtown West Jerusalem. We took one turn down the hill, crossed the invisible green line, and suddenly I found myself in occupied territory. I met a Palestinian family whose home had been occupied by Jewish settlers. As they sat out on the street in protest each night, the settlers, armed with giant guns, came and went from their house, now draped in Israeli flags and nationalist slogans. Nasser, the father, pointed to the Israeli flags draped across his house and told me that to him, that flag represented immense strength and the ability to crush him in an instant. Israeli propaganda relies on the myth that Israel is both invincible and always on the brink of destruction. Hearing about Nasser's life under that domination, as we stood outside his now occupied house, flipped that paradigm on its head. It shattered something in me, irreparably, something that can never and should never be repaired, my Zionism. The next day, I went and sought guidance from a prominent American Jewish writer, someone who influences how American and Jewish audiences understand Israel, hoping he would explain to me what I saw and reassure me that it was not as bad as it had appeared. When I asked him, he sighed, shook his head, and said, "You know, I drive past Sheikh Jarrah every day on my way to work, and I try not to look." It was an honest answer in a safe space, the type of admission you can only give when you know you have a trusting audience. His answer has haunted and animated me for the last 15 years. I saw something that I could not unsee, yet the people that I trusted were working to ensure that it remained hidden. This has propelled me on a journey of witnessing the Palestinian reality, meeting Palestinians, visiting their occupied cities and villages, listening to their stories, reading their history and literature. This is a journey thousands of American Jews, including many of you in this room and watching online, have embarked upon once realizing, as I did, that our community raised us on a lie. The American Jewish establishment desperately does not want there to be more of us. They believe that Jewish lives are inherently more worthy than Palestinian lives, that Jews deserve an ethno-state that comes at a direct cost to Palestinians. And in order to defend the indefensible, they've built an entire industry of denial, diversion, and elision of the cost of Zionism on its Palestinian victims. It's not just the Hasbara, the Israeli propaganda that aims to justify and excuse Israel's crimes. It's also the delegitimization campaign against Palestinians and their allies, the smears, the character assassinations, the attacks on the messengers themselves along with their message. And it's about shifting the frame to keep Palestinians as far away from the story as possible. The Palestinian scholar Sari Makdisi writes about how Zionist mythology is upheld by acts of affirmation that occlude acts of denial. He writes about how Israel's defenders tell stories to reaffirm their righteousness, negating and erasing Palestinians' presence without ever even naming them. Makdisi calls this denial of denial. I remember what it was like to visit Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust memorial, fresh off my youth trip to Poland. I remember walking through the museum's winding exhibit, a hall of horrors committed by the Nazis. It's dark and suffocating. The hall of names of Jewish victims at the end feels endless. But then the hall opens up onto a magnificently beautiful hillside. The message is viscerally clear. This is the light at the end of the tunnel. Few people know that that hillside was the site of Deir Yassin, a Palestinian village where Zionist forces massacred over 100 people in April 1948. The massacre is considered a pivotal event of the Nakba, the catastrophic destruction of Palestinian society upon which the Jewish state is built. Ruins of destroyed villages hidden under JNF forests, names of streets and cities renamed from Arabic to Hebrew, exclusive settler roads traversing the West Bank that cut Palestinian towns off from each other and keep Palestinians out of sight of Jewish Israelis. In all of these ways, the structural violence of the Israeli state towards Palestinians is literally kept out of view. It did not stop in 1948. It has never stopped. This is also why Palestinians call the Nakba an ongoing process. For anyone bearing witness over the last year, this fact is plain to see. Homes, schools, hospitals, mosques, churches, universities, archives. Israel's assault on Gaza has sought to erase the past, present, and future of Palestinian life on that land. Scholars of genocide, human rights organizations, and experts across the world agree that this is genocide. The Palestinian scholar Rabia al-Rabia insists on situating the Gaza genocide inside Israel's century-long attempt to erase Palestinian existence from Palestine. He has called what we are witnessing right now a genocidal variant of the Nakba. Nevertheless, defenders of Israel have doubled down on affirmation, elision, and negation. In an op-ed in the New York Times in November 2023, Senator Chuck Schumer wrote about a five-alarm fire of the rise of anti-Semitism in America since October 7th. The op-ed does not contain the word Gaza or even the word war. Reading the article, one would be forgiven for thinking that a mob of rabid Jew haters simply materialized out of nowhere. This elision is not an accident. The affirmation and denial are both evident in a conversation between Daniel Hartman, the head of the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, and Yossi Klein Halevi, both prominent liberal Zionist thought leaders. On their podcast in December 2023, Hartman declared, "I do not believe that Israel, and neither do you, and nobody in Israel believes that Israel is targeting civilians. It's not in our ethos. We know our army. We know our soldiers. That's not what we do. We don't target civilians." Hartman then suggested that the IDF set up field hospitals outside of Gaza to treat civilians, the same civilians he insists the IDF is not targeting intentionally. There's no reason in the world why Israel couldn't do it, he insisted. There is, of course, one reason that he seemed to not consider, that Israel's campaign intends to produce mass Palestinian death. At this point, South Africa had submitted dozens of pages of evidence of genocidal incitement from Israeli leaders to the International Criminal Court. They both brushed it off as anti-Semitism. In a similar case of denial, we have the author Howard Jacobson, who in a piece in The Guardian in October 2024 accused mainstream media of fueling a blood libel, one of the oldest anti-Semitic conspiracies of Christian Europe. How? By publishing news about Israel killing Palestinian children. In an interview with Isaac Chotiner in The New Yorker, when pushed to answer how the media should cover these stories, Jacobson said, "If Israel was doing that, then what can one feel except that it's monstrous?" He then confessed that he feels a kinship with the Israelis and that therefore he is not going to buy it, not going to buy that they are killing children. This is a textbook example of how defenders of Israel wield accusations of anti-Semitism to deny and deflect from factual descriptions of the Palestinian reality, perhaps even to avoid having to look straight at it themselves. We saw this strategy deployed when Palestinian, Israeli, and international human rights groups accused Israel of maintaining an apartheid system. The same with charges of war crimes and genocide. I know if more people were honest, they would admit that, like Jacobson, they can't bear to look, because doing so would require facing that people they love, perhaps even themselves, are complicit in monstrosities. Israel has killed over 18,000 Palestinian children since the beginning of the Gaza genocide. Every single child killed this year and a half had sparkling eyes, a smile that lit up a room, a mother and a family who loved them, for whom they were an entire universe. That includes 5-year-old Hind Rajab, killed with her family members, shot in their car as they fled Gaza City, and Asser and Aysel, 4-day-old twins, who were killed in an airstrike along with their mother and grandmother while their father, Mohammed Abul Kumsan, was out collecting their birth certificates. This also includes Kfir and Ariel Bibas from Kibbutz Nir Oz, taken hostage along with their parents on October 7th, killed in Gaza, whose bodies were finally returned and laid to rest this week. As former Israeli peace negotiator Daniel Levy said at the UN this week, "A minute of silence for each of the Bibas children would be appropriate, as would a minute of silence for each of the 18,000 children murdered in Israel's devastation of Gaza. That silence would extend to over 300 hours." The way the legitimately heartbreaking story of the Bibas family has been used to manufacture further bloodlust, escalate calls for mass killing and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, has been chilling to witness. I feel deeply for the Bibas family and all the other families of Israeli hostages who are in an impossible situation at the hands of a government who refused to save their loved ones while continuing to abuse their stories to further their genocidal aims. Even as hostage families were being hosed and beaten in the streets by Israeli police, too many American Jewish organizations claiming to support them stayed in lockstep with the Israeli government, denying the reality that many Israelis have long come to accept, that their government prioritized drawing out the war over bringing the hostages home. Denial, again. In order to maintain ironclad support for Israel, many American Jewish organizations deny not just the reality of the Nakba, but also the fact that this unjust, unequal, and oppressive reality endangers all who live between the river and the sea, Jewish and Palestinian alike. They work overtime to preserve an image of a moral and beleaguered Israel, to insist that calls for accountability are an existential threat, and to silence voices of dissent. And there's perhaps no organization more identified with this strategy than the Anti-Defamation League. The ADL says they're a neutral arbiter of anti-Semitism, no matter where it shows up, but that's not true. They have conflated the safety of Jews with support for the state of Israel. In so doing, they undermine their own stated mission of fighting anti-Semitism. How did this happen? Since the 70s, the ADL has sought to popularize the concept of the new anti-Semitism, the idea that Israel as the Jew on the world stage was being unfairly singled out for criticism in ways that echoed old-school anti-Semitism. And they have long worked to smear and discredit the movement for Palestinian freedom. In 2022, the organization escalated its campaign when their CEO, Jonathan Greenblatt, declared Jewish Voice for Peace, Students for Justice in Palestine, and the Council on American-Islamic Relations the photo inverse of white nationalists. I believe this endangers Jews to have leaders in our community so gravely cheapen the meaning of anti-Semitism. But if you don't believe me, believe their own staffers, who also find this position controversial and counterproductive. A senior staffer quit over Greenblatt's mishandling of anti-Semitism on X, his coddling up to Elon Musk as he let hate speech run rampant on the platform. Last year, The Guardian published leaked Slack messages where a senior manager at their Center on Extremism wrote that Greenblatt's comparison of anti-Zionists with white nationalists was intentionally dishonest and damaging to their reputation as experts in extremism. Others chimed in, agreeing that his false equivalencies were incompatible with the data. He didn't listen. When Greenblatt first announced the anti-Zionism equals anti-Semitism policy, staffers also dissented internally. In an audio leak to Jewish Currents in 2022, Greenblatt admitted that he even knew that many of the children of ADL members and supporters were in JVP and SJP. But still, after October 7th, he tripled down on this dangerous posture. Last fall, the ADL and the Brandeis Center went to universities across the country calling on them to investigate, disband, or penalize pro-Palestinian groups under false charges of support for terror and anti-Semitism. The ACLU unequivocally rejected the ADL's call as an attack on free speech. Then, last year, Greenblatt supported the McCarthyite congressional hearings of university presidents and joined MAGA Republicans in calling for police to disband Gaza Solidarity encampments. At first glance, it might seem an odd pairing. An organization that was founded to fight the KKK, and MAGA Republicans like Elise Stefanik, a proponent of Great Replacement theory, and Virginia Fox, who is virulently anti-trans and anti-abortion. Fox made clear that her target in the House education hearings were courses on racism and colonialism. But I return to Nakba denial. It's impossible to fight for civil rights while pushing for the repression and erasure of one specific group. Working to ban Palestinian narratives is part of the same project as banning teaching about racism and colonialism. As long as the ADL supports a civil right carve-outs for Palestinians, it is aligned with and enabling the forces that want to exclude more and more groups from the protection of civil rights law. And now this coalition has the power of the federal government behind them, and they intend to use it. The plan is clear in Project Esther, a draconian vision by the Heritage Foundation to disband not just the Palestine movement, but the entire progressive movement infrastructure using false charges of anti-Semitism. And in Trump's executive order, which targets campus activists with threats of deportation. The ADL statement on this executive order had caveats about constitutionally protected speech, to be sure, but their applause for an administration that is openly embracing racist, segregationist ideologies gives away the game. The irony is that the same far-right political forces powering the Trump administration's return to power have been threatening Jews in this country for years. When Jewish Currents did an audit of the ADL's own data, they found that organized white nationalism was responsible for more anti-Semitic incidents in 2023 than every year since 2017, and that there's a clear correlation between anti-Semitism and anti-LGBT organizing. It must now be stated clearly that the ADL and every other organization that collaborates with the Trump administration, whether because of their Israel politics or to have access to power, are threatening the future of all Americans, including American Jews, who believe in democracy and civil rights, and who reject Trump's movement and all it stands for. It's tragic and it's maddening that we're here, that an organization that's been entrusted for decades with protecting American Jews refuses to condemn the blatant anti-Semitism on display at Trump's rallies and has downplayed Elon Musk's Nazi salute at the inauguration. It's tragic that Jewish organizations like the ADL have become part of the coalition, seeking to undermine the teaching of critical history and undermine decades of progress in civil rights in this country. We know that Jews will not be spared by this regressive Christian nationalist vision. We've already seen attempts to ban books on the Holocaust. We know that the very protections being dismantled right now are the very things that made us safe in this country in the first place. But facing this reality should also be a call to responsibility. This crisis of institutions is nationwide and global. No one is coming to save us. If we want institutions to represent us, we will have to grow our existing alternatives and to build new ones. This conference today is a reminder of the deep and rich traditions of the Jewish left. From the Bund to JFridge, we have so much work to do and so much to learn from and build off of. And nothing can be fixed until it is faced. Despite all the efforts to distract us, to shift the topic away from the atrocities that we can all see plainly on our feeds, despite the scaremongering and intimidation, more and more Jews aren't buying into this Nakba denial. We are looking straight at those horrors in Palestine and in this country. We see questioning the foundational narratives we've been taught about Zionism as an urgent imperative, just like learning about the founding injustices of this country. We're speaking out and marching and organizing against the genocide in Gaza and for justice for all people, not in spite of our Judaism, but because of it. And along the way, we're discovering new partnerships, building new communities, and envisioning new ways of building genuine safety and freedom for all people. Thank you. Do I sit here?
So thank you all for coming. Before I begin, I just wanted to really say to Simone, thank you for everything that you do and everything that you've done. And for those of us that are a little bit on in years, it's really a pleasure and an inspiration to see people of your generation really going to the mat, sometimes literally, to be able to speak truth to power. So thank you, Simone. And I also, all of you, I mean, I know you all look like you're sufficiently caffeinated, but I know that we're all tired because we're all swimming upstream every single day, because we are the opposition in the Jewish world. And it's not easy and it's tiring, and really I just think that we should all give ourselves a round of applause for the work that we do. So I'm going to function as a discussant moderator, and I want to really raise a couple of points, and then I really want to open it up, and I ask you please to have a question mark at the end of your comment and try to make it as succinct as possible. We have 40 minutes, but we really want to have as much of a discussion as we can. I think one of the things that I got from your remarks, Simone, is the way in which there are at least two wars going on. There's a war going on in Israel-Palestine. There's a war going on in Gaza. And there's another kind of narrative war that's going on in America among the American Jews. And it's a war of nomenclature. And it's an important war because nomenclature is important. So for example, I'm really kind of struck by this notion of intentionality, about somebody claiming that they don't intentionally do something, or they don't intentionally, kill children. When you drop 2,000-pound bombs and flatten a neighborhood knowing that there are children living there, is it really not your intention to kill children? It's an important point because as I think you brought out very well, the level of denial that is happening in our world regarding the war in Gaza, regarding the war, the culture wars that are going on in America is so deep and so profound and so frustrating. So questions like genocide, sociocide, intentionality, colonialism, settler colonialism, these are important terms, right? But the other side of it is that they also sometimes become obstacles. So is this genocide, is it not genocide? As if to say if it's not genocide, it's okay, right? Or is this colonialism or is this not colonialism? As if it's not colonialism, it's okay. So there's a trap in that, and I think it's important for us to be aware as we go about our lives and talk about these things and teach about these things and engage with people on social media about these things, is that the question of intentionality, while important, can sometimes be a trap. And I think this is a moment, and I really want to kind of, this is a moment, we are living through a moment. I'm not talking about in general, I'm talking about February 28th, 2025. We are witnessing the normalization of Kahanism in the Jewish world. The normalization of an ideology that the Israeli Knesset itself calls racist is now becoming okay, is now becoming necessary, is now becoming inevitable. And that normalization is not being owned by the Jews who are normalizing it, but the other side is doing it. The other side is creating it. This is really, I think every time I think we reach a red line, I realize that there's another red line. And I think this is really a red line, because once you normalize that ideology of hatred, it's very hard to pull back from that. And I think that it's very important for us to recognize that this is where we are. And I wrote a book about Meir Kahane because I thought I saw it coming, and it's arrived in a way that's actually quite frightening. So I want to just open this up to questions for Simone about her life, her story. We're going to hear more about nomenclature later on with some of the other speakers, but also just to get your sense of how you see the temperature rising and what we have to do to contribute. So I can't see everybody's name tag, so excuse me if I don't call you by name. I'm just going to point to you. Yes, please.
Hi. We have a runner. So
yeah, so.
You need to be mic'd. Come on, Lily. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Hi, it was really great to hear you talk. I was just curious, from your perspective going forward, what do you think the future should look like from your perspective? How do you see this going? How do you think it should go? Just, what's your perspective on that? Loaded question, I know.
Yeah, it's the question no one wants to answer. We're looking to the past so we don't have to, look at how bleak the future feels. I mean, look, I'll say that there's obviously something profoundly terrifying happening in this country. Overseas, it's the feeling that fascism and authoritarianism are rising across the world, this kind of these new norms that have been set, the total trampling of international law. There's a lot right now to be really afraid of. I think that it's also important to say that, as we listen to, the new administration talk about building their, villas on the shores of Gaza, that the only reason they can do that is because a democratic administration supported the decimation of the entire Gaza Strip. And it's important to say that because it's a reminder that this did not start yesterday, and that the only kind of path forward is like facing this this crisis fully. I mean, I think, Shaul, the question about like why use accurate terms is because if we don't name things for what they are, we can't take them on. We can't have processes of accountability, of reconciliation. I mean, I think about, there's a quote I've turned to many times this year from the Palestinian poet Hala Aliyan about accountability is something we should all yearn for. It's the only basis of a sustainable social order. And so there's a part of me, like, obviously feels like we're quite far away from that, but I think the only thing that does give me hope is the possibility that there could be processes of reconciliation, of return, of restitution, of reparations, and accountability. And if we don't have that, I don't know where we go from here. And the one other thing I will say that makes me feel hopeful is obviously like this room. So many more people are coming out. So many more people are having these conversations and asking these questions. Those books that you held up, Shaul, there's so many people in this room who were speaking out when it was far riskier to do so. I'm speaking out feeling so surrounded by community here. And so that feels like something we can build from.
Thank you. Please, yes, in the back. Either one of you. But there.
Hi, Barney Rubin.
It's not working.
Can you hear? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Hi, Barney Rubin. I wonder if you could comment on what Steve Bannon said the other day, which I think there is a new anti-Semitism.
Yes.
And the new anti-Semitism is pro-Israel, and it's directed at us.
Yeah.
That he said are the main enemies more than Islamic supremacists. So I wonder what you think about how to cope with the new anti-Semitism, which is supported by the State of Israel.
Yeah, I mean, so just again, for those who didn't see this really horrifying clip, which actually I was informed was from over a year ago, where Steve Bannon said the greatest threat to Israel are American Jews who don't support Israel, and he called us the enemy. To be honest, like, I heard that clip and I thought to myself, well, that's not so different from how the ADL and other American Jewish institutions talk about us. So, when Trump calls Chuck Schumer a Palestinian, we see that there is a kind of hatred for liberal Jews on the right that they've actually learned from members of our own community. And just to give a couple examples, just this week, the head of the Jewish Funders Network called Jews for Racial and Economic Justice enemy deviants, and he said that he prayed for us to be uprooted from our midst. He did clarify that he hopes other people don't do that uprooting, that God will do it, but yeah. Personally, I was really comforted by that. And so it makes sense to me that we on the Jewish left get accused a lot of times of rhetoric, of using rhetoric that will fuel our enemies, but literally the people in power right now are taking their anti-Semitic talking points from members of our own community, and I find that horrifying.
If I can just interject for 1 second, there's a story of a late 18th century Hasidic rabbi named Chaim Halberstam of Sanz, and they once went to him and they said to him, "Rebbe, what do you think about anti-Semitism?" And his response was, "Aren't you glad the bad people hate us?" Go ahead. Didn't exactly land like I thought it would, but.
Good morning, Adam Mazo, documentary filmmaker here in Boston. I heard you were in a movie. I'm curious what the conversations were like through that filmmaking process for you about what the impact could be and how that compares to what the impact has actually been on your life since the film has come out, and particularly since October 7th.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can say, I think that, I didn't make the film, but I can say that I think the Israelism film team kind of hoped that the conversation, that this would be really much more of an internal Jewish conversation, that they would be able to kind of like bring it to synagogues and Jewish community centers and like invite in these intergenerational conversations. I can say those conversations are definitely happening, but they are not happening inside Jewish institutions, right? Which have doubled down on kind of keeping out any voices of dissent. You know, Hillels have obviously like basically banned the film from being screened. And there have been campaigns by, shout out to Moms Against Campus Antisemitism, who, you know, campaigned to have tens of thousands of parents send emails to universities calling on them to cancel screenings of the film. These are the same parents who are now organizing to create lists of students who should be deported and penalized at their universities. So once again, we're seeing the ways that, the very direct partnerships with fascism in our community are being built. But I'll say that, like, I think something that has really been pretty mind-blowing to me has been the way that this, you know, the way that Israelism, and again, I want to say like the work of everybody in this room who has been building the Jewish left, who has been in the streets, who's been speaking out, this is a beacon to people all over the world. The fact that we are out in public refuting the conflation of all Jews with the state of Israel is probably the most significant thing to fight anti-Semitism that is happening right now. I hear this from people all over the world. And yeah, you know, I think it's always kind of ironic to me. I obviously get accused all the time of people that I, you know, grew up with or who disagree with me of spreading anti-Semitism by telling my story. But I think actually stories like Israelism, the activism of groups like Jewish Voice for Peace and IfNotNow actually gives people a much deeper and richer understanding of who Jews are, the diversity of thought within our community, and actually also gives people a lot of appreciation for the struggles that many of us are dealing with inside our communities.
If you have questions over there, just raise your hand high so that I can, because I can't see as easily. I don't want everything to be. Oh, over there, yes, over there too, yeah. I don't want to be labeled the centrist here.
Neither do I. My name is Nora. I'm with Drop the ADL from Schools. But I want to talk about the Massachusetts Commission on Anti-Semitism, the Special Commission on Combating Anti-Semitism, which is the first in the nation state-level commission, and it's a model that will be replicated across the country. So I feel all of us should be really looking at it and paying a lot of attention. I'm interested in your thoughts about this strategy of engaging the state in, first of all, choosing which Jews are Jews, right? Because the ADL, JCR, CAJC, CJP, they are dominating this commission, and those of us with what they call alternative views are completely excluded. So that's number one. And then number two, of using the state and the resources of the state to weaponize anti-Semitism to silence Palestinians and to legitimize that kind of racism on a state level. And also what you think we all should be doing about it.
Oh God, that's okay, a lot there. I guess the first thing I'll just say is like to go back to the comment that Steve Bannon and Trump made, right? Like, we see that once we start giving the government permission to decide who's legit and who's not, I mean, why can't 80% of American Jews who all voted Democrat, right, be counted as illegitimate Jews? So that's one thing. The second thing is like, we're seeing the ways that this becomes the tip of the spear for a broader assault on democratic freedoms. It's not actually just about Palestine and Jews anymore. I mean, we can see very clearly that the architects of Project Esther, right, this is part of Heritage, Project 2025. We know, we're already seeing from the beginnings of these policies they're putting out that it's very clear that they're not intending to stop at our movements. They're really aiming at the whole infrastructure that just sustain, like the Democratic Party itself would love it if the Democrats would really, you know, fight back against that. But it's really like about dismantling all of the civil rights protections that so many of us care for. So it frustrates me so much when people who are kind of members of these Jewish institutions don't see the ways that the politics that they are helping advance, the connections that it's being made far beyond our community. What do I think we could be doing better? Probably a lot. I think right now, I don't have a great answer for that, but I guess I'll just say, like, I hope that right now folks find local organizations in their communities and really double down on being part of these fights, because we know that the other side has been investing deeply in these local fights, and we have a long way to go to have real power in this country, and it's going to start from, like, deepening our investment in local institutions and community groups.
I think part of what we should be doing is what we're doing, actually. So that's important to keep doing it. I am going, as is my custom, to swing to the left. And yes, way to the left, as far left as you can go. Okay.
I just want to say thank you to Jeremy, who's here somewhere, I'm sure, and to both Shaul and Simone. Simone, I found your talk very interesting, and I agree with most of it. There are a couple of things I want to bring up. When you say historians, genocide scholars agree that, I just wish you could be a little more precise and say many, because it's not everybody. That's point one. It just, because the precision of language and the use of clear facts will help us in convincing people who are not convinced, just to say that. Secondly, I really don't like the term American Jewish establishment. I don't feel like I'm part of the American Jewish establishment. I think it should be called what it is, which is the American Jewish right. And this is something I think needs to be pointed out in a very clear way, and these groups that are supporting Trump and supporting Musk are on the right, as far as I'm concerned. They're helping build the new fascist regime. So my question is it possible to be more precise so as to convince more people, if that makes any sense, to be just more accurate in facts and accurate in naming?
Well, okay, I'll leave it to Professor Bartov, who will be next, to talk about the precision of genocide and the consensus in the scholarship community, so stay for his talk. I guess I somewhat agree with what you just said. I do think that these organizations, I think it's very clear that certain organizations in our community are making a choice. Just another example, when we're talking about federal government, there was this fight around House Resolution 9495. It was the so-called nonprofit killer bill that was very widely understood to be a new tool that would give the federal government the ability to disband any nonprofit that they disagreed with, that they deemed a political enemy. The ADL is one of the only organizations that really supported that bill until the end. So again, I think you're right. It's clear that they have aligned themselves with the right. But there are a lot of organizations in our community who still think they can do the centrist thing. And I think we should talk about that. It's not just that everybody is the right. Back to what Shaul said, I think this whole conversation around the kind of emergent kahanism that we're seeing in our community, there are certain people, I have seen over the last couple of weeks people saying, kahanism has no place in our communities, but these are also people who are saying all Palestinians in Gaza deserve what's coming to them, right? Or who turned a blind eye in whatever way from what has happened over the last year and a half. And there are still people, I mean, I guess if we're being precise with our terms, there are a lot of people who still call themselves liberals who have supported a genocide over the last year and a half. I do not agree that that is a liberal position, but I think that we still need to be talking about the kind of the mythology and the stories that people tell themselves to say that they're a good person while turning away from the crime of all crimes being committed in their names and with their support.
Yes, please. No.
Simone, thanks for your talk. You are a symbol and an expert on the politicization of a young millennial American Jews. And I'm wondering what trends you're seeing in Gen Z and Gen Alpha. What is different? How can we organize them? What can we learn from them? And what should we be concerned about?
Good question.
Great question.
That's the last one.
Okay.
Good question.
You know, again, I guess I'll just say, like, you know, Israelism has been screened on college campuses around the country. I've heard from so many people. They're like, this is my story. I showed it to my parents, and they watched it, and they're immediately, like, the next week in the Gaza Solidarity encampment. So I think the trend that I'm seeing is, like, it didn't take them the 4 years of college that it took me to, like, really sit there. And I know and believe that there are many young people who are still really struggling. And I guess I just want to say, like, if there are young college students right now who maybe weren't in Gaza Solidarity encampments and still are wrestling, maybe are in this room, maybe are watching online, it's not too late for you to come and join these conversations with us. And I can imagine that for the people who weren't ready to take that leap, this is a really confusing time because there are so many organizations in this country and people in our government who want to use those young people to further their political aims. And I really feel for them, and I just really hope that they will see places like this as spaces where they can come and join us.
Thank you. So that's the time we have. I just wanted to thank Simone.
Thank you.
And